Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaura Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. So, today's Rathyatra day. I think a lot of devotees have actually gone down to Puri. I heard that. Anyway, I was asked to speak something about Lord Jagannath Rathaytra, so I'll do my best. I have to add, this setup here is not exactly to my liking, but we'll do what we can. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the early pastimes which led to the appearance of Lord Jagannath. You can read that in various articles and books about Nila Madhav and King Indradyumna and the whole reason for the Lord's appearance. That was many thousands of years ago. Then, apart from that, coming a bit closer to home, we have 5,000 years ago, there was the meeting in Kurukshetra, Krishna, Balaram, Subhadra, meeting up at the solar eclipse, and they met the residents of Vrindavan. So that's also a very significant festival, but I'm going to skip that one over. As we come closer down the timeline, then we have 500 years ago, we have the Rathyatra pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Jagannath Puri. So this has been going on for a long time. It's a very historical event, the Jagannath Rathayatra. As far as ISKCON goes, we also, right from the beginning of Prabhupada's preaching in the West, Lord Jagannath was the first deity to make his appearance when Prabhupada went to San Francisco, and then Malati Devi discovered the small carved figures. She didn't know what they were. She showed them to Prabhupada. He immediately offered his obeisances and asked her. She showed him one figure, so Prabhupada asked her, is there any more? So she came back with two more, a yellow one and a white one. She hadn't got the black one. So Lord Jagannath appeared in America before Srila Prabhupada, or around the same time as Srila Prabhupada. And that's significant because, as Prabhupada often reminded us, when he was a small child, he was having Ratheatra as his daily activity, festival. Every year he would get his father to buy or pay for a Ratheatra, small size for children, and he would organize his friends in kirtan. He would lead and they would chant responsively, and the whole neighborhood would come out and celebrate Ratheatra. So Prabhupada had that right from the very beginning of his life, and he said later on, when Ratheatra became a big event in ISKCON and was all over the world, Prabhupada said that it all began with that childhood pastime that he had in Calcutta. But so it's very significant that when, with the appearance of Lord Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra, then Srila Prabhupada came to spread their glories not just in his neighborhood but in the whole world. So there's one personality that I'm going to talk about right now, is one of the first organizers of Ratheatra in ISKCON. That, of course, is Jagannath Prabhu. We have a samadhi for him at the Jagannath Mandir. So, and Prabhupada also said that Jayananda's picture should be put onto the Rath cart. Wherever we have Rathyatra, there should be a picture of Jayananda. And Prabhupada said he was a pure devotee. He went back to Godhead at the end of his life, which was very short by comparison. He left his body, I think, in 1977. So his activities in ISKCON with the Jagannath Festival earned him the nickname Mr. Rathyatra, because every year he was there in San Francisco and later on in Los Angeles, in New York, putting on the Rathyatra Festival. So he's a very important figure. We sometimes overlook him, but I'm going to read here an interview that Back to Godhead editors had with Jayananda. The reason I'm doing this is because I think that we should pay some attention to, the recent activities of Lord Jagannath on this planet. We can know the previous activities, but we should also know that our recent manifestations of Ratheatra, Jayananda was one of the first ones to help Srila Prabhupada to put that on. So I'm going to read through. This is a conversation of questions and answers between Jayananda and the Back to Godhead. If there's time at the end of that, then we'll have a look at some other recent pastimes. So this is from 1977, Festival of the Chariots in the Back to Godhead. It's called Inside Ratheatra. So Back to Godhead magazine then. Jayananda, how did you first get involved in Krishna consciousness? So Jayananda said, I heard Srila Prabhupada speaking in San Francisco, and somehow I knew that he didn't want to cheat me. So I just wanted to work for him. So that was his first impression of Prabhupada. Here's a person I can trust. He's not giving something concocted, but he's giving something beneficial. And so he immediately decided he wanted to be Prabhupada's follower. So this is in early 1967. So Back to Godhead. So now for 10 years, you've worked on the Rathyatra cards. Jayananda says yes. Then BTG asks, what were the first Rathyatras like? So Jayananda, the first year, 1967, we just rented a flatbed truck and started out on the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. We decorated the truck with flowers and put the deities on the back, and the girls passed out fruit. A good crowd walked along with us at the beginning when we turned off Haight Street, and then a smaller group, maybe 50 people, came and stayed with us, and we went all the way down to the beach. So, let's see. Actually, when when Malati found those small Jagannath deities, then Prabhupada asked her husband, Shyama Sundar Prabhu, can you make a big size? So he was kind of handy with his hands. He knew wood carving and things like that. So he actually made, Prabhupada said there should be 3 sets. And they were all about 2.5 feet high. So they were the first Jagannath deities in ISKCON. They were made by Prabhupada's disciples. So they went all the way to the beach. And he says, the second year, we made our own cart with saffron silk canopies, and we had a parade through Golden Gate Park to the beach. By that time, the San Francisco temple had grown a little. We had maybe 30 devotees, and about 100 people came with us on the parade through the park. The chanting was very nice that year. Then, in 1969, we built a much bigger cart with tall silk canopy, like the ones that they have in Jagannath Puri in India. But then in 1970, we worked for 2 months straight and built the 3 big carts, basically the same ones that we use now. Also, we had all kinds of publicity, TV, billboards, posters, etc. And Prabhupada came to that Rathyatra. So you might have seen that, pictures of Prabhupada dancing. He had these silk clothes on, and he put his hands up and he was dancing, and there's like a few hundred people gathered around him. So that was in 1970. That year was the first year they had a really big Rathyatra. And Prabhupada showed his pleasure with that by dancing up and down. Although, I mean, from his health point of view, he shouldn't have been doing that, but sometimes he would get swept up in the ecstasy of his preaching. So this is the one such occasion. So a lot of people came, maybe 12,000 people. It was a big success, tremendous. We had a few mishaps though. One cart broke down in the middle of the parade, and it was a bitter cold day. But even though it was so cold, at the beach, thousands of people stayed there with us and ate a lot of Krishna prasadam. We brought 20 50-gallon barrels of prasadam, and they ate it all. So 20 50-gallon barrels, how big? It's about, one barrel is about that, right? 50. So later that year, the auditorium we used at the beach had been torn down. So in 1971, we decided to end the parade in the park at Lindley Meadow. That year, and then in 72 and 73, the parade was a little smaller than that in 1970. So they had a particular venue, but in 1970 it was knocked down. So then they had to build something a little smaller. So then in 1974, Bhaktidas came from San Francisco to be the temple president. Sorry, came to San Francisco. And he decided to expand the Ratheatra. He spent more money on it than before, and maybe 20,000 people attended that year. So, good investment. The police remarked that we were the only group that could get such a large gathering together without creating a problem for them. So, there was one recollection Prabhupada used to say sometimes that the police had commentated about our parade, that our parade was the only one that they liked because it was not what he said, a stone-throwing, window-breaking festival. Yeah, just everybody singing and dancing in ecstasy. So the police noted that. Prabhupada was very happy. This is not the stone-throwing parade. Prabhupada came that year and he gave a speech at the meadow. He was sitting beneath the Jagannath deities on their opulent 3-tiered stage. Even without much understanding, everybody could appreciate that here was a majestic, awe-inspiring celebration. Another wonderful thing that we started that year was the fairground-type booths at the meadow. You could see the unlimited scope of Vedic culture. We had a deity workshop booth, a transcendental art booth, a literature booth, and of course the main booths for selling food. So that has become now a regular feature of the festival. So in 1975, I tried out making steel wheels, but the chariots were so heavy they flattened the steel, and it made the ride very bumpy for the deities. So they made these huge steel wheels, but they were made with spokes. So as they went forward, the metal on the wheels kind of flattened out. So instead of having a complete circular, then it was like a, what you call it, octagonal kind of a... Anyway, it was very bumpy for the deities. So then the next year, he said, we went back to the standard wooden wheels. So back to Godhead. What instructions has Prabhupada given you about Ratheatra? Jayananda. Well, I never got much personal instruction. He just told me to make everything very strong. I'm not a real visionary about it. I just built the carts. Back to Godhead. Which Ratheatra do you think has been the best so far? Jayananda. Well, in New York last year, that was the most festive. So that was 1976. Prabhupada had begun ISKCON in 1965. 1966. So 10 years later, they finally had the first Ratheatra parade in New York. And it was a very wonderful event. About 1,000 devotees, our devotees, came from all over America and even some other countries like South America and Europe for that event. So it was very significant that just at the peak of Prabhupada's preaching, then that culminated with this fantastic Ratheatra through down Fifth Avenue in New York. So when Prabhupada participated in that, he said, this is a dream come true. So he was very happy that finally after 10 years we had a full-scale Ratheatra, and it was the biggest one up to that time. So in New York, that was the most festive. Not until then had I experienced so many of the transcendental qualities of Ratheatra. You know, for a parade, there is nothing like Fifth Avenue. It's the most important street in the world. And when we went to Washington Square Park to pull the carts home, hours after the parade had finished, thousands of people were still there chanting. They were everywhere. People were coming out from their apartments and coming out of bars, shouting, Hare Krishna. Only in New York could you get such a response. So that was his experience, the Fifth Avenue. We still have, every year they have the Ratheatra down Fifth Avenue. Just a couple of weeks ago they just had this year's Ratheatra. So back to Godhead. Tell us from your own experience what the public gets out of Ratheatra. Jayananda. The impact is so powerful that everybody is affected. In New York there were thousands of people out on the street and they were astounded. It's not that I'm claiming it. The people themselves were interviewed on TV and that's what they were saying. Also, I remember one man with his girlfriend, she didn't like us at all, who told me sometime after the festival that when he saw the carts coming down the street, he felt a parade had just come down from heaven. And he often remembers the carts and the chanting with pleasure. So this man was there with his girlfriend or lady friend. She didn't like the parade at all. He was the opposite. He thought it was like a heavenly parade coming down. So people were hit by it. It's so far beyond their usual experience. You can't measure the impact. All year long, they do more or less the same thing. Maybe they catch a few parades, like the Thanksgiving Day parade. They stand and watch some big balloons go by. But it's all the same. So he's talking about the regular Kami organized festivals. Thanksgiving's Day, and what's the other big one in New York? The Irish, I think in March every year. Anyway, but nobody's seen anything like a Rath car before, and it's literally out of this world. So we have a whole troop of devotees singing and dancing around these lofty transcendental chariots. Then the people are transformed. They used to be mundane creatures, but when they see the Rath carts, they become angels. It's like bringing out the best in people to see Lord Jagannath smiling at them. I tell you, at first their faces look like they haven't changed in 25 years, and then all of a sudden it's like glass cracking, and then you see the whole face is transformed just by a few moments association. So people that are not normally given to participate in these kinds of affairs, when they see the Rathyatra, it's something entirely different from whatever else they've ever seen. So, and what to speak about those who take part? Rathyatra encourages everyone to take part. Come on, walk with us, dance, grab a rope and pull. We don't say, don't touch. No, we say, join in, have fun. By our nature, we all want to participate. Nobody wants to be a bystander. And those who take part are purified of all their sinful karmic reactions just by chanting Hare Krishna and seeing Lord Jagannath. Back to Godhead. Are there people who regard it as idol worship? Jayananda. Yes, they may feel that before, but the impact of the festival is so strong that afterwards they feel otherwise. They see Lord Jagannath and they see how merciful he is, and they can feel that it's not idol worship. And if they read Prabhupada's books, then they'll understand logically how Lord Jagannath is not an idol. Of course, at the festival there are always a few fault finders. Last year in New York, one of them had a bullhorn, that's like a megaphone, and he was shouting. So some of our men poured water down the bullhorn, and that stopped him. There's always, every year, there's a group of fanatics, usually Christians, turn or burn. They have placards, turn or burn, means turn to Jesus or burn in hell. So they protest. But we go on, and actually in 1976, the Ratheatra, the first New York Ratheatra, Prabhupada got on at 34th Street. He went all the way down to Washington Square Park. Then Prabhupada got off, he gave a short talk. He mentioned about the eclipse and Lord Jagannath, Balaram and Subhadra attending that. And then he went back to the temple, and he left the festival part of the parade for the devotees to conduct. So when Prabhupada got back to our temple, then he was feeling fatigued. So he had me give him his like a light massage, dry massage. So as I was giving him his massage, Prabhupada started laughing. And I was a bit puzzled, why is he laughing? And then Prabhupada said, did you see? He said there was one man, he was shouting and heckling us. So he was standing on this, there's some kind of a pond or something there, with a low brick wall. So this guy was on the wall and he was shouting and heckling whilst Prabhupada was giving his talk. Because Prabhupada was up on the band shell. There's like a stage area. So Prabhupada was up there, the deities were behind him, and he was looking out over the crowd. Everybody in the crowd was looking towards us, and this man that was heckling us, he was at the back. So really not many of us saw him, but Prabhupada was watching, And so he was laughing. He said, "Did you see? There was one man, he was shouting." So he said one big black man came and bang, he knocked him into the fountain. So Prabhupada was laughing. And actually that was one of our devotees, Jagannath Vasu. He's about like 2 meters tall. So he saw this guy was shouting, causing a disturbance, so he went up, bang, he knocked him in the fountain. Prabhupada thought it was funny. Not that we should do that, but... So, back to Godhead. What is your understanding of the purpose of Ratheatra? So Jayananda, to celebrate the pastimes of Krishna. Krishna is so kind. He comes to earth and displays so many wonderful pastimes. Ratheatra celebrates that he's going to Kurukshetra with Balaram and Subhadra, and is meeting there with the residents of Vrindavan, where he was born. The expressions of love shared between the Lord and his devotees make that one of the sweetest pastimes. Ratheatra offers a chance for so many people to be engaged in Krishna consciousness. People don't come to our temples much, but millions are out there on the street. So here's a chance for them to advance in spiritual life. Here comes Lord Jagannath's festival. They're touched, they become part of the transcendental vibration, and they're purified. Also, for the devotees, it is very beneficial. Maybe more for me. Ratheatra is the service that's been given to me, that's given me so many of my realizations. The flowering of whatever Krishna consciousness I have comes from that. It's not a long-term occupation. It happens all at once, like a big explosion in the summer. It brings together so many devotees, all working hard together under the spiritual master with one plan. And all the transcendental paraphernalia is there. The deities, the prasadam, the chanting, the booths, the theatre. It's such a surcharged atmosphere. You will never forget it. For a devotee to be able to participate in Ratheatra is very good for his Krishna consciousness. When you have these festivals, it gives you a big, powerful event to look forward to and to work towards. It helps in your devotion. Back to Godhead. How about the future growth of Ratheatra? Jayananda. Well, one thing that's important is that all the temples should celebrate this wonderful festival. But it isn't practical for each center to construct 3 chariots. So now in Los Angeles, we're putting together a traveling party that can go from city to city with displays and carts that you can assemble and then take apart. Then the great expense will be eliminated of building new ones every year. Also, we have year-round Rathyatras. We go to the south in the winter and the north in the summer. It can be expanded so people will be hearing about Rathyatra year long, and that will be the perfection of their lives. Back to Godhead. It sounds wonderful. Thank you very much, Jayananda Prabhu. So, Jayananda Prabhu ki jai. So that's a little glimpse what he was feeling. In 1976, actually, Keshava Bharati Maharaj, he had formerly worked with Jayananda in previous years doing book distribution. Can everybody hear me? So he said that in the build-up to the first New York Ratheatra, he happened to come out from the bathroom one day, and Jayananda came out, and he was bent over double, and he was obviously in a lot of pain, so he could hardly walk. So Keshava Bharati said, he rushed to help him, and then he asked him, what is it? What's the difficulty? So then he lifted. First of all, he wouldn't say, but he said, if I tell you, you're not to tell anybody else. Yeah, this was just before the Rathyatra. So he agreed, and then Jayananda lifted his arm up, and he had some large lumps underneath his arms. It was cancer. So he'd gotten cancer, but he didn't say anything to anybody until after the Rathyatra had been completed. So that was his dedication. After that, he went to Los Angeles. I think in 1977 they had their first Los Angeles Ratheatra. I might be wrong on that, but he went there. By that time he was in a wheelchair, but still he participated in the Ratheatra. And then shortly after that, then he left his body, and that was he sent a letter to Srila Prabhupada. In the early days of ISKCON, he was one of the first to come forward and give some monetary support to Srila Prabhupada. So he had given Prabhupada $5,000 for the printing, I think, of the TLC, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So now, years later, at the 1977, Prabhupada again received $5,000 from Jayananda, and I think Jayananda left his body before Prabhupada was able to write a reply. So Prabhupada was very, very moved that this disciple had done so much significant preaching work with the Rathyatra, and now he was giving that $5,000 that was supposed to be for his treatment, but he said, what is the use of keeping such a body? So I'm sending you this for your book printing. So Prabhupada appreciated that very much. And then it was asked what his destination was. So initially Prabhupada replied that at least he would go to the heavenly planets. But then later on he said, actually he went back to Godhead. There is a letter to that effect. Prabhupada said that Jayananda had gone back to Godhead. And that was when he said that we should have a picture of Jayananda on every Rath cart. Said that's his appreciation of the service that he did. So Rathyatra, as we see there, started off very small, just one truck, but every year it was expanding and expanding and expanding. Nowadays, just like I was not recently, a few years back, I was in Malaysia. So in Malaysia they have about 35 Rathyatras every year. So you can see how big an affair it's become, and it's a very important part of our preaching. People see the Rathyatra, they get completely transformed. We often, devotees that were involved in like building or constructing the Rath carts and organizing the festival, it was always a time of new devotees joining. I remember I was involved in building the Rath carts in Australia for about 4 years, and every year whenever we were constructing the Rath carts, there would always be 2 or 3 people that would come, shave their heads or put on saris and become devotees just by being attracted to the Rathyatra. So it's a festival that Prabhupada was very, very enthusiastic about. As he said, he'd done it when he was a child, and now he's just doing the same thing with ISKCON. So, all right, I'm going to stop at this point. Does anybody have any questions, or you can add some stories about Ratheatra? Anybody got any questions?
I remember that incident with the man shouting at Prabhupada, trying to interrupt his lecture. So
Yes.
I was watching that unfold, and Prakeshwar Pandit, do you remember him?
Yeah.
Prakeshwar Pandit's a real stocky African devotee, and it was like a locomotive. The man was standing on the side of the fountain, yelling, trying to interrupt Prabhupada. And then I looked and I saw Prakeshwar, and he started up kind of slow, and he got faster and faster until he was just in full speed, and then put all of his weight into it, and then wham, and the man went flying into the fountain. And it was nice to hear that Prabhupada enjoyed that incident.
Yeah. A funny story from Los Angeles. There was a group of Christians that used to come and heckle and harass, not exactly harass us, but they would heckle us, and they had big signs, turn or burn, and that kind of thing. And there was one guy in particular. He would sometimes dress up in funny costumes to attract attention to himself, and then he would tell people, don't buy their books, don't, go on the parade, this is all idol worship and whatever. Then one year, Rameshwara told me that he was going along where they were serving out the prasadam, and this same guy, for years, had been coming and harassing everybody and accusing us of idol worship. He's standing in the queue to get his prasadam. So it's very sublime. Lord Jagannath is very active. He's the support for the whole movement. He was there at the very beginning. He made his appearance in ISKCON. And we always have very wonderful experiences when we have the Rathyatra parades. And sometimes some not so wonderful. You always get a reaction from people. In Australia, when I joined in 72, that was like February 1972. A few months afterwards, then Madhvisa Swami came to be the GBC there. So he actually had joined in 1968 in San Francisco. And the first thing that he did was help to construct the Rath carts with Jayananda. So he had 2 or 3 years experience with the Ratheatra festival. And then he came to Australia in, I think, about May of 1972. So the first thing that he did was organize the first Australian Ratheatra. I was fortunate to be able to help with the construction of that. And Madhvisa, he had that experience of, how Ratheatra transforms people. So he felt that we could really give a boost to our preaching if we had Ratheatra going on. So we built that year we built one chariot. It was very successful. Not a lot of people, but still it was a very exciting festival. Then the next year we built 2 more Rath carts so that we had 3 altogether. And then in 1974, Prabhupada came to Melbourne. It was midwinter at that time actually, but Prabhupada came because the Australian Yatra were standing at number 1 in the book distribution scores. Every month we would get this newsletter saying how many books have been distributed, and Prabhupada was really pushing the devotees to do more and more book distribution. And he told Madhvisa that if you become number 1 in the temple lists, then he said, I'll come to Australia, which he did. So he came in 74. It was an interesting visit. We had Srila Prabhupada there. This was towards the end of June of 74. And there were a couple of incidences with fire. I don't know, but we were building the Rath carts on some site a little away from where the parade was going to take place. And at that time we were having some problems with some disgruntled relatives of one girl who had just joined the temple in Melbourne, and they were harassing us. So I think 2 or 3 days before we had the parade, and Prabhupada had just arrived a couple of days before, we had this incident. I was sleeping in a van near where right next to where the Rath carts were being built, and there was some of the girls were up on the decking of the Rath cart, so they were sleeping up there because there was so much work to do. We had to work until about midnight, and then we'd stop for a couple of hours and then go to Mangalarati and then come back and do more work on the Rath carts. So it was a real marathon. So one night I heard this shouting. One of the girls was shouting out my name, Hari Sauri, Hari Sauri. So I jumped out of the van, what's going on? And somebody had come in the middle of the night, and they had these, they call them fire starters, like little briquettes, but they soaked them in kerosene, lit them, and put them on the Rath carts. So one of the girls woke up, she could smell smoke, and somebody had come, some demons had come, and they had actually set fire to the Rath carts. But fortunately, we woke up in time. We were able to put the fires out. So that was when Prabhupada was there. But we didn't tell Prabhupada about that attack. But sometimes you attract attention, you get problems with demons. So that was one incident with fire. And then another one the same week, our devotees, we had rented a shop front, a storefront in downtown Melbourne. So the devotees were there making the canopies for the Rath carts, the canvas canopies. And as they're doing their work, they hear this shouting, fire, fire, and they ran out into the street, and 2 doors down from where our storefront was, there was a place where they were, I forget what they were manufacturing. There's some place they were manufacturing something or other, flammable. Oh, it was a photographic studio. So quite a few people were working there, and then all of a sudden some fire broke out. So they had to climb out, they couldn't get down the staircase, they had to climb out onto a ledge where the windows were, but 1 story up. There was like a ledge, so they had to climb out through the window, and 2 or 3 of them were standing on the ledge. They couldn't move because the flames were coming out. So the devotees, they took hold of the canopy, Lord Jagannath's chariots. They ran out with the canopy and held it like you see the firemen do, and they told them, jump, jump. So these ladies jumped into the canopy and were saved by Lord Jagannath. It was very far out. So that was in all the newspapers. The next day on the front page, Hare Krishna saved women from fire. And that was shown to Prabhupada. He was so happy. He said, yes, the devotees are always saving us from fire. So he was very happy with that. So usually you could count on something during Rathyatra, extraordinary would happen. And generally it would be to our advantage. Because we went a little bit too far. In 75, I think it was, the devotees, we needed flowers for the Raths. So we had no money. So in night time, some of the boys were going out in a big van, and there was some like horticultural development and some flower growers on the outskirts of Melbourne. So they drove there in the night, and they went into the greenhouses, glass houses, and they, took as many. I think they were. There's one particular flower that we used to get. Anyway, they loaded up the van with all the flowers from these greenhouses. Then on the Rathyatra day, which was the day afterwards, then as we were finishing up, the construction, the police suddenly came, and they had with them this farmer, and it was his glass houses that had been growing carnations. So the devotees had wiped out his entire crop, which was like most of his income for half the year at least. And so they'd seen the Ratheatra carts, and because they were nicely decorated with carnations, so the police came and they told us, okay, no, you're not going to have any parade unless we find out who took the flowers. So one of our devotees, he went up to the police and asked them what the problem was, and they told him these flowers have been stolen, so we want to know who did it. So his name was Sumendranath. He voluntarily told them. He said, well, it was me, I took them. So they took him away to prison, and we were able to still have the Ratheatra because he made that sacrifice. Later on, he got fined about $2,000. He had to pay for the stock that was stolen, and initially they also sentenced him to 1 month in jail. So we had an appeal. The appeals court judge was a reasonably nice fellow, so he cancelled out the 1 month prison sentence, but he said, as far as the reparations go, paying back, what you'd taken, he said, well, the man, you're a monk, so although I'm not going to cancel that out, he said, more or less he told the farmer, don't expect to get anything back because they're monks, so what money does he have? Anyway, Prabhupada was informed about this later on, and he told us, don't do this again, it's not good. So it was a bit... Anyway, there were a lot of pastimes in different places. Anybody else have any? Yes, sir.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, in Cape Town we have Ratheatra every year like everywhere else, and last time it was cancelled because of COVID, but before then there was a politician that stood up and he said it's the only festival where you really see the demographic of Cape Town come in, because we have a very diverse community, and you see Asian people there, you see colored people there, you see black people there, you see white people there. And he says in no other festival do you see this sort of unity between the races and between the people that you see at Ratheatra. It was also one of the first festivals I went to, and it's really the only time when it's so easy to distribute books. The book distributors go out with stacks of books and they just sort of fly out. It's an amazing festival. Yeah.
Good. Well, I mean, that's the experience whenever you go to Ratheatra. Something magical always happens. Actually, I'm just thinking back to the first Ratheatra carts that we built there in Melbourne and Sydney. And that first year when Madhudvisa came and decided we should immediately have a Ratheatra festival, we had no money and practically no resources of any kind. So the only way that we could build the Rath cart was to find, a source of wood. So I used to give a list of the wood that we needed, and then in the evening the boys would go out in the van and they'd pick out different building sites. There's a lot of construction going on, so they would pick out certain building sites where they had stacks of wood, and then in the night time I'd go in the van and load up the van according to whatever the list was that I gave them. They would find that wood and then put it in the van and bring it back, and that's how we built the first Rath cart. Then the next year we decided we wanted to have 3 Raths. We got 1, now we wanted 2 more. So same thing, we made a list of what we needed. The boys went off and they went some building site and they were loading up, and then the owner came and he caught them red-handed, stealing the wood. So he told them off, but fortunately somehow or another he didn't report it. He just told us, don't do it again. So then we had a debate whether we should, if we're going to have the Rath parade, then we have to have the more wood. And if we don't get the wood, then of course we can't have the Rath cart. So getting caught on the very first day, it made some of the devotees think that, well, this is Krishna telling us that we shouldn't be doing this. And then other devotees were saying, no, this is a test, right? It's to see whether Krishna's just saying whether we're determined to have the Rath cart or not. So we had a choice, and we all decided, well, if we don't get the wood, there's no question of Rathyatra. So we'll take that this is Krishna testing us to see whether we're really serious about having the Rath carts. So we went out every night after that. Somehow or another we never got caught, and we built these 2 more Rath carts, big ones this time. So that was the kind of mentality that the preaching, and it had to go on somehow or another. But after the flower incident the following year, then we stopped it. Now we have, as Jayananda was mentioning there, we have Rath carts that we can put together or take them apart and easily transport. So, okay. Any other stories or comments? Yes. Give him the...
About tactic of preaching, I noticed that we go out...
Speaking to the microphone.
We go out with Jagannath and Baladev and Subhadra, and we know who they are, and we can relate and love them, or develop our closeness. Or
you have to speak loudly.
Yeah, like we can relate to them, but I think a person goes long way to understand even Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra. So I was wondering, for the karmis, their mind is not built for it. It's like their mind view is like completely against it. How do we, is it such a great, we go out to preach with Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra. Is it attracting people? Is it bringing people to Krishna consciousness?
Yeah. Well, Rathyatra is one of the most important festivals that we have. Yeah. Prabhupada started Rathyatra right at the very beginning, 1967. And there's some film actually of that parade with a flatbed truck and about 40 or 50 hippies dancing around. That was how it began. Compared to what we have now, that so-called Rathyatra is nothing. But still, the whole development from that, now we have hundreds of Rathyatras all over the planet. So, yes.
The night before, in New York in 1976, I was working with Jayananda on the carts, and the devotees had decided that it would be a good idea to have the canopy go up and down with a hydraulic flagpole. So the flagpole, as soon as they tried it, it took the canopy up, and the wind was starting to blow it, and then Jayananda looked up and he said, "It's gonna bust." And as soon as he said the word bust, the pole snapped in half and the whole canopy came crashing down at 10 o'clock at night before the day before the Rathyatra. So then Jayananda, he stayed up all night long. He got railroad ties, and he built this. He rebuilt the canopy thing so that the railroad ties, one would go up on top of the other, and then he put in like wedges, to keep it from falling down. And so he reconstructed this. So he was up all night doing that. And then he still took the carts himself down to Fifth Avenue the next day.
Yeah, I mean, it was a real austerity building the chariots. We would always end up the last 2 or 3 days before the actual parade. There'd be so many things that still had to be done. We'd stay up all night sometimes and not sleep for 2 or 3 days just so we could get the Rath carts out on the festival. So it was a time for making a lot of advancement when you have these Ratheatra festivals. Okay, we're going to finish at this point. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jayananda Prabhu ki jai. Ratheatra ki jai.